Through a partnership with the University of Arizona School of Nutritional Sciences, the goal of this project was to design processes aimed at reducing the waste generated by the brewing process. This project was carried out on two scales. The first is in the nutrition department's pilot plant, which is a small-scale brewery used to educate students interested in the brewing process and fermentation. The second is the on-campus brewery at Cork and Craft, which is a newly opened restaurant and bar at the Student Union.
There are 4 major unit objectives associated with this project. The first is a closed-loop cold water system, which will be carried out on the pilot plant scale. The second and third objectives are both aimed at transforming waste streams into viable economic co-products, with one project targeting spent grains and the other the spent yeast. The final unit objective is the design of a carbon dioxide recapture system. Both the waste repurposing projects and the carbon dioxide recapture system will be primarily carried out on the microbrewery scale. Each of these projects will individually assist the Nutritional Science Department in reducing waste within the brewing process. Together, they reinforce the University of Arizona's goals for sustainability both now and in the future.
We aim to create a closed-loop water system for the pilot plant brewery, which makes use of the equipment that is already available within the pilot lab. Currently, after every brew day, cooling water is sent down the drain. This wastes water in the desert where water is already a non-plentiful resource. The existing process uses the cooling water to cool the wort in the brewing process. Water from a refrigerated tank is sent to the heat exchanger, where it exchanges heat with the wort to lower the temperature of the wort to the required temperature for the brewing process to continue. The heated water is then wasted down the drain. For this project, the team was required to create a closed-loop water cooling system to eliminate this waste. To do this, it was necessary to send the water through another heat exchanger with water from the university's chilled water system. This then cools the water to an adequate temperature for the refrigerator to perform the same amount of cooling as it currently does, utilizing the warmer domestic house water in the pilot lab. For this project, it was necessary to appropriately size the second heat exchanger required to allow for sufficient heat transfer in this system. Additionally, the second pump required by the system was sized in order to have the required amount of horsepower and overcome the system head. This system would cost roughly $7,000 to implement and roughly $700 per year, including projected labor and utilities costs.
In an effort to further the overall sustainability goals of the microbrewery, spent yeast and grain repurposing systems were designed with the goal of transforming these waste byproducts into viable economic co-products for the microbrewery. Yeast converts the sugars present in the grains into ethanol and carbon dioxide in the fermentation process. However, after this process, the yeast and grains are generally disposed of via the brewery drain alongside the excess water.
This process not only results in the generation of a large quantity of waste, but it can also cause damage to the sewer system, which may lead to some regions instituting regulations regarding the disposal of brewery waste products as the microbrewery industry continues to grow. Therefore, it is very important to find alternative uses for the spent yeast and grains to avoid these potential regulations and to find an additional source of revenue for the microbrewery. It was found that dried yeast could be added as a feed supplement for cattle, where it can provide additional nutrients not present in usual cow feed. The spent grains can also be mixed with wood chips and used as compost.
For the yeast, tests were conducted in the pilot plant in order to estimate the amount of ground yeast that could be produced from effluent. In this process, the yeast was first centrifuged in order to separate the liquids and the solids, at which point the solid paste was spread onto a baking sheet and dried in an oven before ultimately being ground into powder using a blender. For the microbrewery scale, various pieces of equipment, including a storage tank, drum dryer, and mixer, were chosen in order to replicate the process for separating and drying the yeast in a more time-effective manner, especially when accounting for the increase in production. Ultimately, the equipment chosen for this aspect of the project will cost an estimated $17,000, with estimated yearly expenses of approximately $3,000. Based on tests conducted in the pilot plant, the production estimates for the upscaled process, and pricing estimates for yeast as a supplement for cattle feed, it was determined that approximately $8,000 could be made per year selling the dried, ground yeast produced by this process.
In order to repurpose the spent grains made in the process, extensive research found that composting is a common use of grains from the brewing process. For the grains to be used as a composting agent, they need to be mixed with a lignocellulosic bulking agent to reduce moisture. More so, the grains must be cooled down to an optimum temperature of 45 degrees Celsius and mixed with the wood chips in a 2-to-1 ratio. At the microbrewery level, we determined that we would use cooling equipment which already exists at the pilot plant but would require a 200-quart mixer to combine the grains and wood chips. At the pilot plant level, we are able to cool the grains produced in about 203 minutes with the refrigerator in-house. At the microbrewery level, we will be producing 20 times the current amount of waste per brew day, and our time becomes 4,060 minutes. It is important that the composting heap is maintained in optimal conditions. In partnership with the university's etymology farm, we will be caring to the heap by making sure it is turned once a week and ensuring the height of the compost heap does not exceed 1 meter, which is done to prevent the production of methane in the pile. It was then decided that the compost should be sold at 20 cents per pound, leading to a total profit of $12,000 per year.
The last of the 4 waste-reducing projects for the microbrewery was to design a CO2 capture system. For breweries, purchasing CO2 can not only get expensive, but can also be unpredictable depending on the supply of CO2 in the market. By capturing and reusing the CO2 generated during fermentation, this removes the extra costs of purchasing the CO2 and helps alleviate the stresses caused by the unpredictable market. Traditionally, the CO2 produced during fermentation is released into the atmosphere, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and possibly an unsafe work environment if the brewery is not properly ventilated. Our system captures the CO2 emitted during fermentation and purifies it to meet high standards of purity. Our system begins by capturing the CO2 that's emitted from the fermentation tanks. The captured CO2 is then directed into a gas buffer balloon, allowing us to store enough CO2 to run the processes downstream. Once the gas balloon has reached the proper volume, the CO2 is routed through a compressor where it's compressed for around 17 seconds, emptying the balloon entirely. Next, the compressed CO2 passes through a condenser to remove any water vapor present in the fermentation gas. This step ensures the purity of the captured CO2. To further purify the CO2, it is then filtered through a series of activated carbon filters. These filters efficiently remove harmful contaminants such as hydrogen sulfide and dimethyl sulfide, ensuring the highest quality of CO2 for our brewery's needs. Once purified, the CO2 enters a liquefaction system. In designing this system, Aspen Plus software is extremely helpful as it allowed us to predict the efficiency of the system as well as the final quality of the liquid CO2. This system utilizes a series of compressors and interstage coolers and results in a 98% pure CO2 liquid. The liquefied CO2 is then stored in a specialized tank until needed by the brewery. This tank ensures the safe and secure storage of the CO2 until it's ready for use. When needed, the liquefied CO2 can be easily evaporated using ambient air, returning it to its gaseous state. With our CO2 capture system, we're not only reducing our environmental impact, but also ensuring a sustainable future for our brewery and the planet.
Together, the design of these 4 separate processes will allow the University of Arizona and the Nutritional Sciences Department to meet their sustainability goals by reducing waste throughout the brewing process, while also providing additional sources of revenue. Thank you for listening. We are Chemical Engineering Team 10.